Hi everyone, good day. I hope all is well, yeah? So, welcome back to our weekly online class for PAD370 Public Financial Administration. We have come to chapter 4 or topic 4 for this week, yeah? Which is we are going to learn about public expenditure. So, without wasting too much time of yours, let's start our class now. Alright, as usual, before we proceed to our lesson, I'm going to expose the content syllabus for today's online class. Alright, for 4.1, we're going to see the definition of the public expenditure of course, and then followed by the scope and roles, reasons for public expenditure, principles of public expenditure, classification of public expenditure in Malaysia, budgetary process in Malaysia, and of course, the conclusion. Public expenditure is defined as the way in which public resources are allocated and managed in pursuit of fiscal discipline, strategic prioritization, and value for money. Fiscal discipline is often the priority. Public expenditure is a basic means of implementing government policy and utilizing sources productively, effectively, and sensitively. Only two things that you have to remember here, yeah, if you want to define what is public expenditure. The first one is public resources allocation, and then second one is it is the means of implementing government policy, because anything to do with government plans, government activities, they need money from the public expenditure. So next, Barrow identifies government spending into three main types. The first one is government consumption. Yeah? Government purchases of goods and services for current use are classed as government consumption. Second one, related to infrastructure investment. So what is infrastructure investment? It is a government purchase of goods and services intended to create future benefits, yeah? And then next one, the third type is transfer payments. What is transfer payments? It is government expenditures that are not used to purchase goods and services and instead just represent transfers of money, such as social security payments. So I have already summarized for you, so it's easier for you to memorize it. So types of expenditure, we have government consumption, infrastructure investment, and also transfer payments. Government consumption is very easy. Yeah? It is for the current use of purchases of goods and services. Meanwhile, for infrastructure investment, it creates future benefits. So class, we are going to look at the scope and roles of public expenditure. Okay. Now, we want to know what does this public expenditure cover, yeah? Alright, this is the first point. The scope of public expenditure means the department of components in a country that need to be taken care by public expenditure. So what are the components under public expenditure care? Number one is defense. The defense of a country has been one of the main factors responsible for increasing public expenditure. Large amounts are spent on preparation or on adopting means for the prevention of a war. Number two is for economic development. The state has to give top priority to economic development. Economic development is a costly affair. Lots of money has to be spent on economic development. Thirdly, for social services. There has been a remarkable expansion in social services of a country like education, health, community development, And such expenditure builds up human capital. Okay, let's take a look at the defense first. When you look at the Defense Department itself, it is very important, because it is related to the country's protection and safety. Meanwhile, for economic development, it is also obvious that expenditure is needed to develop our economy better. And then for social services, this one too is an obvious one in which we need money from the government to build up school for education, hospitals for health, and then all the activities related to community development. Next one. Okay. Next one is related to administration. So the modern states are no longer police states concerned with the maintenance of law and order. They are now regarded as welfare states. The law, security, and administrative functions are being performed by the state. These functions need expenditure. In terms of administration, it is related to the welfare, the law, security, and as well as the administrative functions itself. Meanwhile, for number 5, which is grants to provincial government, the central governments allocate to the provincial government, and the provincial governments give grants to local authorities to incur some desirable expenditure. For example, federal government in Malaysia allocates expenditure to local governments for maintenance and road works. For example, the federal government, they give money to the government of Sabah and Sarawak to build on and maintenance the roadworks in both of these states. And then number 6, subsidies. Subsidies have also to be given to encourage the production of certain goods, especially for export, to earn much needed foreign exchange. An example, the federal government provides subsidies to fishermen and farmers to boost agricultural productivity. Subsidies is like a gift, or a discount to help the people in need of it. And then number 7, exploitation of natural resources. The government has to undertake schemes of exploration and development of essential resources, for example, coal, oil, and other minerals. So the summary of scope of public expenditure, we can categorize all the scopes just now into 3, politics or administration, economy, and also social. Okay, let's do this together. Alright, for politics or administration, you can see that defense is for politics or administration, right? Because it is related to the safety of the country. But it can be identified or it can be justified as social services as well. Social field, I mean. So we put here defense. Defense. Another one here. Defense as well. How about economic development? It's obvious. It's under economy category. Why my laptop is so lagging? also economic development. Alright, the third one, which is social services. Obviously, it's under social category. Social services. Next one, number 4, which is administration. It should be under here. Administration. And then next one, grants to provincial government. It's related to administration and politics as well. Grants. And then next one, subsidies and exploitation of natural resources. This is more to economy, yeah? Both. Subsidies. Natural resources. Could be administration as well, for natural resources, because the government manage the natural resources. Okay. There you go. You have for politics, you have for economy, and you have for social. It's easier for you to memorize, yeah? Okay. Alright guys, before I forget, I want to touch on the human capital, yeah? Here. For point number 3, which is social services. So what is actually human capital? And human capital is actually very important, yeah? Human capital means the skills possessed by people in a country that can be used in contributing something for the government and the country itself. Expenditure for social service is seen as one of the most important part in the government's spending. Why? Because the money spent for education, health, and for other sustainable development and improvement of the society in the country will help to sustain or generate backup of generations that will contribute to country's survival. So that's why human capital is very important. Next one, we are going to take a look at the roles of public expenditure. So there are 3 key roles for public expenditure, and all of these 3 key roles are very straightforward. So I bet I don't need to explain more on this, yeah? The first one, fiscal discipline or expenditure control. Fiscal discipline results from good forecast of revenue as well as expenditure. Fiscal discipline has a close relation with the control of budget magnitudes effectively, and it assumes a binding role on both macro level and expenditure unit by means of expenditure ceilings. Okay. What is actually fiscal discipline, guys? Fiscal discipline, it refers to a state of an ideal balance between revenues and expenditure of government in an economy. In the fiscal discipline, if the fiscal discipline is not maintained, then the government's expenditure exceeds government receipts. Please remember that, yeah? Okay, for the next one, number 2 and 3, strategic allocation of resources. So allocation of resources consistent with policy, strategic allocation of resources. The use of the budget as an important planning and management tool is necessary over here. And then number 3, good operational management and tax administration. Revenue aspect of good operational management of expenditure and taxes have to be efficiently and properly collected so as to benefit everybody. To be fully effective, public expenditure management systems require 4 forms of fiscal, and financial discipline. The first one is to control of aggregate expenditure. Aggregate means the whole, yeah. To ensure affordability, that is consistency with the macroeconomic constraints. Number two, effective. Effective means for achieving a resource allocation that reflects expenditure policy priorities. Number three, efficient delivery of public services means productive efficiency, yeah? And then number four, minimization of the financial cost of budgetary management. An example, efficient budget execution and cash and debt management practices. Next one, we are going to look at the reasons on public expenditure, or the reasons for public expenditure. Okay, so reasons for public expenditure. The first one, need for proper budgeting of resources. The country's resources have to be allocated for various governmental initiatives. Every item of expenditure has to be calculated and worked out for a specific period. Number two, for the stability of government. Prudent spending is essential for the stability of a government, and proper earnings are a prerequisite to wise spending. And then number three, to achieve government goals. Every budget deals with how actual funds should be allocated to various projects and sectors. By allocating funds for the various sectors, it can help the government in achieving its stated goals and help the nation achieve its mission. So government, they can achieve their own goal, while meanwhile for the nation, they can achieve their missions. And then number four, it is for instrument for using resources effectively and efficiently. All governments have to collect resources from the economy in a sufficient and appropriate manner and allocate and use those resources responsibly, efficiently, and effectively. The national budget is the main instrument through which these transactions are planned and carried out. It's as simple as that, yeah? Now we are going to take a look at the principles of public expenditure. So the World Bank Public Expenditure Management Handbook identifies 10 widely accepted principles for public expenditure. So there are 10 widely accepted principles here. The first one is comprehensive, followed by discipline, legitimacy, flexibility, predictability, contestability, honesty, information, transparency, and also accountability. Let's take a look at the first four first. Okay. Comprehensive. Number one, yeah. The budget must encompass all fiscal operations of government. Number two, discipline. Decision-making must be restrained by resource realities over the medium term, that the budget should absorb only those resources necessary to implement government policies, and budget allocations should be adhered to. And then number three, legitimacy. Policymakers who can change policies during implementation must take part in and agree to the original policy. Number four, flexibility. Decisions should be pushed to the point where all relevant information is available. So I just want to explain a little bit on each detail, yeah, on each detail. Okay, for the first one, comprehensive. Comprehensive point explains that public expenditure should cover all important operations belong and planned by the government in a country. It can't miss out certain spending that it should cover, yeah? In example, in terms of distributing tax income for a social development purpose, expenditure should not be missed out, the area that needs extensive spending. especially when it comes to providing resources for education and health purposes in rural areas in Malaysia. And then for number 2, which is the discipline point, as you can see from the explanation, expenditure budget should only be allocated for necessary things, yeah? That is why budgeting is very important in identifying which things are important and which are not. Meanwhile, for number 3, which is legitimacy, it refers to the involvement of people with authority and power in the implementation of public expenditure. And number 4, decision on the government's spending must be flexible. It can't be decided based on confusion or for something that is unnecessary. Hence, whenever editing process is being done, there will always data and information to refer to. Alright, next one, point number 5 until number 8. All of these points are very straightforward, yeah? The first one, predictability. There must be stability in macro and strategic policy and in funding of existing policy. And number 6, contestability. All sectors must compete on an equal footing for funding during budget planning and formulation. Number 7, honesty. The budget must be derived from unbiased projections of revenue and expenditure. Unbiased means there is no unfairness there. It must be very fair. Information. Okay, information is related to our previous point, which is flexibility. So a medium-term aggregate expenditure baseline against which the budgetary impact of policy changes can be measured and accurate information on cost, outputs, and outcomes should be available. So all the information on cost, outputs, and outcomes shouldn't be non-available. It must be always available. Very simple, alright? And then point number 9, transparency. Decision makers should have all relevant issues and information before them when they make decisions, and these decisions and their basis should be communicated to the public. And number 10, accountability. Decision makers are responsible for the exercise of the authority provided to them. In the past, the World Bank and other donors have tended to focus on the need for restraint in defense expenditure in order to increase resources available for accepted development purposes. So that's all 10 points of principles of public expenditure. Next one. So what can you see from this picture exactly? There are 2 categories, right? The orange and the blue categories. Okay. This is for entertainment only, yeah? So we're going to look at the categories or classification of public expenditure. So there are 2 categories in expenditure, yeah. The first one is operating or management. This is for expenditure for regularly daily activities. And for development, it is capital expenditure which is not repeated and produce long-term profit. So these are the elaborations for operating or management expenditure. The classifications for the first one, for sectors. It is divided into economic, social, security, general administration, charge and transfers, such as grant, loan and repayment. The functions, vote head, which further classified into supply vote and charge vote, and then further classified by programs or activities. And the objects, emoluments, supply and services, assets, grants and other expenditures. So these are the components of operational or management expenditure. Supply bill and expenditure charge on Federal Consolidated Fund. You can read that by yourself, yeah? Next one, the second type or the second category of public expenditure, the development expenditure. The classification, there are two classifications here, the section and also the functions. Section is divided into economic, social, security, general administration, and contingency reserve fund. And the functions, development vote had, which further classified into projects. On the other hand, development expenditure is to achieve the objectives of the 5-year Malaysia plans. It is normally financed from loans and trust funds. Emergency expenditure is also allowed under Article 103 of the Constitution for special cases such as wars, famine, and floods. These expenditures are financed from the contingency fund. Alright, next one, process. It's related to process, yeah? So for process, we are going to look at the budgetary process in Malaysia, in which it involves the expenditure budget. So let's take a look at the process. The first one related to budget formulation. This involves collecting, classifying, analyzing, and recording the data. It is initiated by the department itself. Okay. Number 2, budget approval. This is the most important step in the budget process, where the budget prepared by the executive must get the approval of Parliament. Number 3, budget implementation. After Parliament has authorized the budget in the form of an act, expenditure authority is then made available, enabling the administration to make expenditures and to incur obligations. And number 4, public auditing. This is the final stage in the budget cycle, where a comparison is made of budget estimates with actual expenditure. Okay, if you want to know more in details about it, okay, about budget formulation, Treasury will send circular to all ministries normally around February. Yeah? The circular will be a guideline for all agencies to prepare their estimates based on the prevailing policies of the government. Treasury will request estimation of expenditure from all government agencies for next year. Agencies will prepare budget based on previous year's budget as a guideline. All departments will prepare estimates and then send it to the controlling officer of their respective ministry, who will then review estimates from each department. Controlling officer will then prepare estimates for his ministry and send it to Treasury. Budget review officers at the Treasury will review estimates from each ministry and then consolidate budget to be sent to Cabinet. Budget is submitted to Cabinet around August to be approved by Cabinet by Minister of Finance. Once Cabinet approves budget, it is then ready to be sent to Parliament. So under formulation step, you only need to know that two important months, yeah, February and August. February, the circular is being announced. Meanwhile, August, they need to submit the proposal to the Cabinet. And then for step number 2, which is budget approval. This is the most important step in the budget process, where the budget prepared by the executive must get the approval of Parliament. In parliamentary democracy, it is the executive that prepares the budget. The legislature has no hand in formulation of the budget. Remember, yeah, executive prepares the budget. Normally, the budget is introduced into the lower house of Parliament in the form of a budget speech by the Minister of Finance. The budget speech sets out the detailed estimates for the operating budget and is normally presented in the form of an appropriation or supply bill. Once the bill is passed by both houses of Parliament, and in the case of Malaysia, by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, it then becomes an act, a supply act, yeah? And then step number 3, which is the implementation. The collection of revenue and administration of tax laws are part of budgetary implementation, as are the supervision and control of authorized expenditures. expenditure cannot be incurred without the signing of a warrant by the Minister of Finance, which is then given to the Chief Accounting Officer. The warrant enables the controlling officers in each ministry to incur expenditure for the budget year. Allocation for expenditure is normally given directly to ministries, called self-accounting departments, through the controlling officer, Section 15A of the Financial Procedure Act 1957. It is based on this act. The controlling officer is normally the top civil servant in a ministry, and he is in control of all accounting officers under his ministry. The last one, but not least, budget auditing. It is under the purview of the Auditor General, Audit Act 1957, who is primarily concerned with the operation of the budget. He has a responsibility to see that money is made available only for expenditure authorized by Parliament, and at the end of the year to examine any deviations that have occurred and to report to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. The report of the Auditor General is examined by the Public Accounts Committee, which will inquire into all expenditures made without parliamentary approval and report to the legislature. In the case of Malaysia, to Dewan Rakyat. And as the conclusion, when it comes to budgeting, classifying areas of weakness helps the government to allocate resources in a beneficial and justifiable manner. It is important for the government to guarantee that funds reach where it is vital the most. Therefore, using data recorded to identify sections of the society in need of economic welfare policies and implementing those policies helps the government prove the efficient governance and attain economic solidity in the country. Alright guys, we have come to an end of topic 4. So thank you for your attention. So for now, as usual, please stay safe and take care.